Most American producers think of fertilizer as a routine input, something you buy, apply, and move on. But in 2025, fertilizer is no longer just a product. It has become one of the most important geopolitical weapons shaping global agriculture. The prices you pay for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash are increasingly determined not by local suppliers, but by decisions made in Moscow, Beijing, Rabat, and Minsk. Fertilizer is the hidden battlefield of modern geopolitics, and American producers are caught in the middle without even realizing it. The global food system depends heavily on three essential nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium or potash. Without them, yields collapse. But what most producers don't see is how concentrated and fragile the global supply of these nutrients has become. Nitrogen depends on natural gas markets. Phosphorus relies on reserves controlled mostly by Morocco and China. Potash is dominated by Russia and Belarus. When these countries shift policy, restrict exports, or face sanctions, American farmers feel the impact immediately, sometimes within weeks. A handful of nations now control the choke points of global fertilizer supply. Russia and Belarus together account for over a third of the world's potash exports. China is a top producer of phosphorus and nitrogen fertilizers and has repeatedly imposed export bans to protect its domestic supply. Morocco controls the world's largest phosphate reserves, making it the center of global pea production. This isn't just an imbalance, it is power. When only a few countries hold the keys to critical nutrients, fertilizer becomes a strategic asset, not a commodity. For American producers, the consequences are already clear: extreme price swings, unpredictable availability, and rising operational risk. The 2021 to 2023 fertilizer shocks were not isolated events. They were early signals of a new era in which global politics directly determines the cost of every acre planted. When Russia was hit with sanctions, potash supply tightened worldwide. When China restricted exports, nitrogen and phosphate prices surged. Every decision made thousands of miles away quietly reaches your farm budget. What happens overseas now decides your cost structure at home. This is the warning producers can't afford to ignore. The greatest threat to your fertilizer bill is not longer inflation or supplier markup, it's geopolitics. Fertilizer has become a strategic lever in global power competition. A diplomatic conflict, an export ban, a military escalation, or a sanction package can instantly change what you pay and how much you can apply next season. As the world becomes more polarized, these risks will only intensify. What happens on the other side of the world determines what you pay per ton and ultimately how much profit you make per acre.
Most producers think fertilizer prices rise because of market cycles, weather patterns, or domestic supply issues. But the biggest forces are political, not agricultural. Fertilizer supply chains are deeply exposed to geopolitical power plays. The countries that dominate potash, phosphates, and nitrogen also dominate the politics surrounding them. When a government imposes export controls, faces sanctions, or enters a regional conflict, global fertilizer flows shift instantly. Producers in the U.S. end up paying for political decisions they had no role in, decisions made in capitals half a world away. Russia and Belarus together control more than one-third of the world's potash exports. When the West imposed sanctions following the invasion of Ukraine, those supply lines fractured overnight. Potash didn't disappear, but it became harder, slower, and more expensive to move. Freight insurance costs soared, shipping routes changed, and global buyers scrambled for alternative suppliers. As demand bottlenecked, prices spiked. Even when sanctions didn't directly target agricultural goods, the financial restrictions and logistical barriers still pushed potash prices to historic highs. For U.S. producers, the result was clear: higher per-acre costs and narrower margins, driven not by supply shortages, but by geopolitics. China is one of the world's largest producers of phosphates and nitrogen-based fertilizers such as urea. But during periods of domestic inflation or food security concern, Beijing restricts exports to protect internal supply. These restrictions ripple across the world because China is not just a supplier, it is the supplier. Each time China closes the tap, global buyers are forced into bidding wars, pushing prices upward. U.S. producers indirectly pay the bill for a policy decision made in Beijing. Less fertilizer on the world market means fewer choices, higher premiums, and increased vulnerability when planting season arrives. These export controls have become a recurring geopolitical weapon, influencing global markets whenever China decides to tighten or loosen the flow. Nitrogen fertilizer depends on natural gas. Roughly 70% of its production cost comes from energy. And for decades, the Middle East has been one of the most important natural gas suppliers on the planet. But regional instability, military clashes, pipeline disruptions, and political tensions can cause sudden gas price spikes. When gas prices rise, nitrogen fertilizer prices follow immediately. Even U.S. plants that use domestic gas feel the impact because nitrogen is a global commodity. Expensive gas anywhere means expensive nitrogen everywhere. This is why every flare-up in the Middle East eventually lands on a producer's fertilizer invoice, even if that producer lives thousands of miles away. When Russia faces sanctions, China restricts exports, or the Middle East destabilizes, fertilizer markets respond with extreme volatility. The result for U.S. producers is an environment where costs swing wildly from year to year, sometimes doubling with little warning. Budgeting becomes harder, margins shrink, and the profitability of an entire season can collapse because one geopolitical event tightens supply. Farmers are now managing not just weather risk, but global political risk. And unlike weather, geopolitical shocks don't follow natural cycles. They strike unpredictably and with immense financial impact. The biggest danger is not the price spikes, it's the structural vulnerability behind them. The U.S. depends on foreign-controlled nutrients for large portions of its fertilizer supply. That means American agriculture is exposed to political decisions made by strategic competitors and unstable regions. This dependency limits producer autonomy, inflates long-term production costs, and undermines the resilience of the U.S. food system. As global tensions rise, fertilizer becomes a strategic weak point. The risk is clear. If geopolitics decides the price and availability of nutrients, then geopolitics decides the profitability of American agriculture.
Fertilizer isn't just another input. It's now one of the most strategically sensitive components of modern agriculture. What happens in Moscow, Beijing, Minsk, or the Middle East no longer feels distant because the consequences show up directly in the cost of every acre you farm. For years, producers assumed fertilizer markets were driven by supply and demand cycles or domestic manufacturing capacity. But the truth is much sharper. Fertilizer is geopolitics, and geopolitics today is part of agricultural profit. That means your margins aren't shaped only by weather, yields, or local market conditions. They're shaped by sanctions, export bans, trade disputes, energy shocks, and diplomatic crises. A political decision made overnight on the other side of the world can raise your nutrient costs before sunrise. A gas pipeline disruption in the Middle East can inflate the price of nitrogen across the entire Western Hemisphere. A new export restriction in China can rewrite the global availability of phosphates within weeks. You're playing on a field where the rules are being changed by foreign governments, not by your operation. And ignoring that reality is no longer an option. If you want to protect your operation, your margins, your input strategy, your pricing outlook, you need to understand the forces shaping your costs before they reach your supplier. By the time a fertilizer price spike hits your retailer, it's already too late to prepare. The decisions that determine next season's expenses are happening now at the geopolitical level, long before those numbers appear on your invoice. Awareness is no longer a luxury, it is a competitive advantage. This is why staying informed is critical. The producers who understand the geopolitical triggers behind fertilizer prices are the ones who plan better, negotiate better, and protect themselves better. They're the ones who know when a price spike is temporary, when it's structural, and when it signals a deeper shift in global supply chains. In a volatile world, knowledge is leverage, and leverage is survival. If you want to stay ahead of fertilizer volatility, if you want to understand the risks shaping the 2025 farm economy, if you want to protect your operation from geopolitical shocks long before they hit your bank account, follow this channel. Subscribe now. Because the global fertilizer market is no longer controlled by producers, it's controlled by geopolitics. And the producers who stay informed are the ones who stay profitable. Stay prepared, stay ahead, stay protected. Follow and subscribe to this channel for clear insights on fertilizer prices, geopolitical risks, and the global forces shaping American agriculture.